Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Iowa State Cyclones Live here on the Voice of College Football Network. I'm your host, Levi Stevenson. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram and the other suches at my socials right there. There. But anyways, yeah, so welcome back for another week. Appreciate all the Cyclone fans that are able to tune in live. I know Iowa State's just getting tipped off at a game at Hilton Coliseum against Colorado. But I appreciate it on any Iowa State fan that's able to tune in live. Even if it's just for the second half, that's okay. But I appreciate any other fans from any of the other college teams joining us for today. I think this will be an interesting conversation. We've got a couple things, really two main things on the docket. First up, I'm going to be going through Iowa State's combine, NFL combine participants, and doing a draft, kind of a quick draft, profiling each of them, just kind of show what scouts seem to be seeing about them, where they might go in the draft, things like that, because Iowa State has 5 of them in the NFL combine this year. So it's a good year for Iowa State putting guys in the pros once again. And then after that, Mark Rogers himself is going to stop by. He's going to talk about his book. And then we are probably going to have a short discussion about the college football playoff, which we got some reports yesterday that the Big Ten, the SEC, which will be assuming control of the college football playoff after next season, that they are eyeing right now an expansion to 14 or 16 teams, and probably with multiple auto bids for each conference. So we will be discussing that as far as kind of what that means for college football, what it means for Iowa State, for the Big 12. But we will be getting that kind of in the second half of the show. So to start off, I want to talk a little bit about Iowa State's draft prospects, specifically the ones that are getting invited to the combine right now. And first up is we're going to talk about there's 2 receivers. Iowa State's pair of 1,000-yard receivers. First one up is going to be Jaylin Noel, who came out. He came out as a 3-star prospect out of the Kansas City area, and was an immediate starter at Iowa State, played all 4 years as a starter, caught balls from Brock Purdy his freshman year, Hunter Deckers his sophomore, and Rocker Beck his junior and senior year. Was a special teams player, especially later on in his career at punt returner and kick returner. And really just from day one was on the field making plays, and showed to be a guy you want to get the ball in his hands and let him work from there. And then he really, really took off his junior and senior season after Rocco got there. And he seemed to, look to Jaylin as his guy. Brock Purdy had Charlie Kohler and Xavier Hutchinson, and early he had Hakeem Butler. But, so every quarterback finds their guy. Jaylin Noel, at least to start, was Rocco's guy. Now, obviously, Jayden Higgins, who we'll talk about here in just a little bit, also had a really nice 2 years in names. But Jaylin Noel put together one of the more impressive 4-year careers at Iowa State for any wide receiver ever, really. Left I believe in the top 5 in catches. Had a big season this past season, eclipsed 1,000 yards, and really turned into, it was the half of one of the best, if maybe not the outright best, wide receiver duos in the country. Not necessarily best individual receiver, but as far as most productive duos in the country, Iowa State's Jayden Higgins and Jaylin Noel are right up there. And he has played himself into an interesting conversation as far as the draft goes. So Jaylin Noel this is Jayden Higgins. I meant to pull up Jaylin Noel. Jaylin Noel is a really interesting prospect. He's a little bit smaller. He's about 5'10", 5'10", 200 pounds to, 190 to 200, 210, somewhere in there. Not a huge guy, but he is a prototypical slot receiver. He's a guy that you can just going to get him the ball in space, maybe in a screen. But he showed a lot of ability the last 2 seasons to really stretch the field with his speed, as a vertical threat as well, which, which having that type of versatility in your route tree is huge in the NFL, because in the NFL, they really don't like specialists at the receiver position. They want guys that can go do everything. Certain guys are better at certain things than others, but for the most part, the NFL doesn't really take a flyer on just jump ball receivers or just red zone threats. Once in a while they have in the past, but I think the recent trend has been to get away from that. If you go back and look at a guy like Kelvin Benjamin coming out of Florida State was mainly a red zone guy, and the Panthers took a flyer on him, and he was okay for a couple years, and then I think he's out of the NFL now. Um, you know, Mike Evans was initially thought to be a little bit of a red zone kind of guy, a vertical threat maybe, but he has turned out to be an exceptional, probably, you know, on pace to be a Hall of Famer. We'll see, but he's been one of the best receivers in the NFL for the last decade. And you look at the NFL, and now they're taking guys that are versatile, that have good all around skill, that have all around skill sets. They can run, they can run short routes underneath, they can go vert. Jaylin Noel is that guy. Obviously, a little bit smaller at 5'10", 5'11", maybe 6 foot on a tall day, but somewhere in there. But the NFL has not shown any hesitation towards getting guys on the field if they know they can play. He's tall enough where he's not going to get, just where he's not going to just get completely lost. I mean, Hollywood Brown, if you look for the Kansas City Chiefs, he's like 5'8", something like that. Tyreek Hill's like 5'7", 5'8". He's not very big. The NFL will find a spot for you if you're worthy, and Jaylin Noel is every bit of that. For the most part, I see a lot of stuff that see him as a potential day 2 pick. Second, third round, probably third round, somewhere in there, which, if you're a third round, it could be anywhere second to fourth round. Couple interesting ones. Actually, there is one first round projection here from Brett Whitefield from Fantasy Points. I don't know much about him. He's the only one that has Jalen above the second round. But it's worth noting that he's at least got in there. Texans would be an interesting fit, especially with another former Iowa State receiver in Xavier Hutchinson already there, and is a regular player in their rotation. It'd be interesting. Another target for CJ Stroud. I think that would honestly be a very good fit for him. Couple other options. San Francisco in the third round. I love this. Not only because Brock Purdy is the quarterback there, and an Iowa State guy throwing to an Iowa State guy in San Francisco is obviously very enticing to me. But San Francisco needs receivers. They at some point they're going to move on from Deebo Samuel. It might be this season. Might be this offseason. They need to get Brock targets, and especially ones that are durable. And Jaylin Noel has shown to be a very durable player. I really like that pick. If the 49ers were to get him in the third round, I would love that. Now, the 49ers need help on the offensive line. They could probably use some help at corner as well. But I would imagine that's probably where they'll go for the first couple rounds. But if you can grab a guy like Jaylin Noel in the third round to give Brock another target, I love that. And Brock did play with Jalen Jalen's freshman year and Brock's senior year, so they're familiar with each other. I think that would be awesome for Jalen. The Eagles are an interesting option. They could, they're a pretty well-rounded team as it is. The Eagles really have little to no weaknesses. Maybe they could use a pass rusher and they'll take that in the first round. But getting another guy, getting a slot guy to pair with AJ Brown and Devontae Smith, I think would be an awesome fit right there as well. Titans, the Titans are just kind of bad. They need a lot of help everywhere. So he'd probably get some early playing time with the Titans, but no surprise. I'd love to see him play with Brock in San Francisco. I'd love to see him play with the Eagles. For any of you that have not seen Jaylin Noel play, you can see him right here in the slot. And this shows you a little bit of his route versatility here as well. So if we can watch him, he's going out here. He burns. This is back here at safety is Xavier Wampa. He was a 5-star, high 4-star, low 5-star safety out of the Des Moines area, so out of Southeast Polk. He's been playing at Iowa. I would assume after next season he'll probably look at the NFL. I don't know what kind of look he'll get because he's got some limitations, but overall a decent safety. But you can see back here in the double end, you can't see it on TV, but bang. I mean, Jalen's gone. Nobody's catching him. This is a guy that he can hit the deep ball. You obviously used him in deep catching situations a lot this year. You can see this move right here. Bang, right there. Using great leverage. Xavier Wampa bit in on a little bit. Jalen made a great move, planted his foot and hit that post, and it was a great ball from Rocco. That kind of thing is where you can really use him. He's got exceptional speed. And you can also use him coming around here. This was on the first play of the game against North Dakota State. That's a great contested catch. Horrible throw by Rocco Becht. Don't ever throw that again. But that is a really, really nice catch in traffic by Jalen. If you look at this, there's just no space, and he just catches it right in the middle there. exceptional. And he did that a number of times throughout the year. He made a big catch against UCF, which actually we might be getting ready to see here right now. So he's going to go here. Rocco's going to find him. Yep, right there. So you just burnt guys, made a nice catch in traffic there. That was late in the fourth quarter when Iowa State was down. So big catch right there. Iowa State used him a lot in these vert situations because he was just faster than everybody. But early in his career, especially, he was a prototypical slot receiver, and I think he'd be fit great there for any NFL team that wants to take him. So this is Jaylin Noel. I think when you look at the combine, the places he can make up, I don't know if there's really a lot of ground to make up. I mean, his tape's good. He's kind of a known commodity as an athlete. Just people know he's a good athlete. If he were to put up, I mean, just like every skill position player, putting up a good 40 time is never a bad thing. But I think at the combine, if he can be in the 4.4s or lower, which I don't think should be any issue. I would expect to see him in the 4.4s as far as his 40 time goes. And really in his route running, I want to see some good fluidity, some good flexibility in his hips, which I think you'll be able to see. He just runs really good routes. He's got great hands. And it's a guy that you can put on special teams right away. He returned punts at Iowa State and did a very, very nice job this past season returning punts. For the first couple of years where he was returning punts, Iowa State was not particularly aggressive, but he just does a nice job. He's a good run blocker for his size. This is a nice pick. If any NFL team that can grab him and use him, in the third round, fourth round, something like that, nice little vert catch right there. I think he's going to be a nice fit. He fits perfectly in just about any modern NFL offense. I think he's going to be a really, really nice pro. So the next up is going to be his running mate, which was Jayden Higgins. Another receiver out of Iowa, another receiver that was part of this, that was part of the 1,000-yard tandem for the Cyclones this year. He was a transfer after his sophomore season at Eastern Kentucky. Iowa State pulled him in as a 2-year transfer. So he played last year and this season. And, just to begin last season, he had the same kind of transition period that a lot of guys do when they're coming up from the G5 into a Power 5 school, where it takes a few games just to get up to speed, get a feel for the pace of the game, for the physicality of the higher levels. And, but by the time you get to the middle of the season, he is looking like a number one wide receiver that every team in America would want. And he was great. He was amazing. I want to say he put up I have to look up the exact number, but he put up basically a 200-yard performance against Memphis in the Liberty Bowl last year. And he just did just a phenomenal job establishing himself as just the dude over the last couple of seasons. This year, Iowa State would use him all over the field. They'd use him in vert situations. They'd use him underneath. They'd use him in crossing routes. And he was just a guy that did such a good job getting open. He's one of those guys, if you're looking at a player comp, I think if you look at a guy like when he was coming out of college, if you look at what kind of prospect like a Justin Blackmon was coming out of college. Now, obviously, Justin Blackmon had his own issues and just didn't work out in the NFL for a number of different reasons. But just as the type of player he is, you got a tall body receiver that's just really good at getting open. But he's very good in the open field too. But when you look at his tape, you see a dominant. This is a guy that's got the skill set of a number one wide receiver. We'll take a look at that here in a second. Right now, Jayden Higgins is kind of in that same day 2-ish category with Jaylin Noel, but I think his size at 6'3", 215, 220 gives him some more upside with NFL teams. They see him, he can be an effective run blocker, on the perimeter. He can do a lot of different things. His skill set, he's not just a jump ball guy. He's not just a red zone guy. You can run him across the middle of the field. Iowa State did it all the time. He has a few more first round grades. The Bills, and primarily here for the Bills and the Lions, as recently as last month had a first round for the Lions there. Recently, the last month or so, you see mostly round 2, round 3 grades. I think that's probably, I don't think he'll be a first round pick. I think he's got the skill and the talent to do it, to justify being picked in the first round. But there's a few decent receivers here. It's not a super strong draft, but there's a few decent receivers here that teams may say, well, the top few receivers are going to be off the board, so let's wait a round or two to grab this middle chunk of receivers that is fairly solid. So I'd be a little surprised if he went first round, but this is a guy that I think he can fit on virtually any team with a quarterback that can throw a back shoulder fade, or that can effectively throw a ball to the back shoulder, which in the NFL is most guys. But I think the Bills, I mean, I would love him to be a Bill. They need to get weapons in there for Josh Allen, and this is a guy that's got the skill set and the size to be a full-on number one wide receiver for a team like the Bills that will get him in space, and a guy like Josh Allen that'll get him the ball exactly where he needs to go and can get it to him downfield. Lions are interesting. I mean, so that's a little bit more of a downhill running team. So it's a definitely different style offense that I think Jayden would be good in. I think he'd be a better fit in Buffalo just from a personnel perspective. Obviously, the Lions already have him on St. Brown, and so they've got a couple good receivers there. So he'd be probably more like the 2 or 3. But I think in Buffalo, if they took him there, he'd have a shot to be pushing for that. To eventually be that number one wide receiver, which for a guy like Josh Allen would be awesome. The Ravens would be an interesting fit too. Lamar's been, as he's gotten older, Lamar is throwing more and running less. So they're becoming a little bit more of a vertical offense, but they've got a stable running game there with Derrick Henry, at least for the next couple of years. Him being in Los Angeles there, their quarterback situation's not super certain for the future because Matt Stafford's getting older, but, and if he even decides to come back to LA, but that, obviously Sean McVay is an offensive guru. That's a guy that'll be able to use Jayden Higgins, and Jayden Higgins would obviously be back a couple, be behind Puka Nacua for sure. Probably Cooper Kupp. He wouldn't be asked to be the number one wide right away. So that would be an interesting one there too. Plus, as of right now, anyways, former Iowa State offensive coordinator now is Nate Scheelhaas is now an offensive analyst for the Rams. So there's some familiarity there with the coaching staff. Nate will know how to use Jayden Higgins. So that's interesting there. Some other teams here I think would be a fine fit. I would really hate for him to go to the Browns. The Browns have not had a receiver do well there in a long, long time. Steelers could be an interesting one as to grab Jayden along with to go across from George Pickens. I think that would be a very interesting fit for him in Pittsburgh. But man, give me the Bills all day. If the Bills can grab him in the second round, man, that'd be fantastic. So let's look at Jayden's tape just a little bit. Obviously going back to this Iowa game, because this one right here is the first, I think this is a great example of kind of the first major way that Jayden can be an impact player at the NFL level. And I know I said he's not just a red zone threat, but he is an exceptionally good red zone threat. You look at here, this back shoulder throw, I'm not sure exactly how many he caught, but Jayden Higgins has a pile of touchdowns on these back shoulder throws. He's virtually unguardable. You watch this here, the cornerback actually does a really nice job in coverage. But unfortunately, Jayden Higgins is just better. And that's just kind of how it goes. He's a guy that even in the NFL, he's going to match up physically very well with a lot of NFL corners. Right there. Another thing, he's very good at tracking the ball mid-flight. Even that ball was a little just a shade underthrown, but it was really kind of intentionally underthrown here too. But you watch him, beautiful move, get some separation on the outside, and just that box out in the end zone. He's just unguardable that way. If a cornerback's sitting off and not pressing him at the line, I'm not sure how you even guard that. He does a nice job after the catch. He's got enough speed to turn it upfield and get yards, catching it up the middle of the field. This is a guy you can line up inside, outside, do whatever you need to do. Rocco's going to find him here on a nice ball. Good ball by Rocco, really. But nice job by Jayden Higgins there in the end zone. Let's see if I can get I didn't get another shot here, but you put him on a one-on-one here. He didn't burn the corner, but he wasn't necessarily trying to, but he was just nice outside shoulder there. He's got the size to get up and make about any play you need him to. Right there. More in the end zone. Just if it's a standard 6'6" type corner, physically they just can't match up with him. And even right there, he burnt the corner. You know, he can do a lot of different things. Catch balls over the middle, catch him on the outside. He can fit in about any offense that wants to use him and wants to get him the ball. Nice throw by Rocco there too. But you can see you can use him all over the field. I think this is a guy that if you can grab in the second round, you're ecstatic because he's probably, honestly, frankly, he's probably a first round talent. It's just a matter of, it's really just a matter of team need. Because he's not a top 10 pick or anything like that, but he'd be a back end of the first round guy. So, and the back end of the first round, you already have teams that usually have good players already, and it's just mostly team need at that point. But gosh, I would love to see the Bills grab him. Um, I don't think the 49ers, I think the 49ers would rather have some speed, but 49ers could use a weapon. Eagles could use another weapon. The Dolphins will have to replace Tyreek probably or potentially. So lots of places for Jayden Higgins to land. I think he's a really interesting player. I think he's going to be a very successful NFL player, and he can be a number one wide receiver for anybody too. So that is Jayden Higgins. Next up is going to be safety Malik Verdon. Now, this is a guy, if you haven't been paying attention to Iowa State intently, and maybe you're not as necessarily tuned in, this is a guy you may not have heard of. But Malik Verdon is a really interesting safety here. When healthy, which is going to be the entire key here. He was arguably Iowa State's best safety and Iowa State's secondary was one of the best in the country. And when he's healthy, he is an exceptionally good run safety. He's very good on the edge, and stopping run, especially to the outside where Iowa State's defense is designed to spell run plays. When you get him in deep coverage, at times he can get burnt, but he's a guy that he's been a bit of a ball hawk for a good bit of his career. When he can jump routes in front of him, he is a ball hawk that can intercept passes pretty quickly. Like I said, in deep coverage, he's not at his best when he has to cover like a speedy receiver, like a real burner, like on a post route or something like that, where he's got to really turn his hips and turn it around the other direction. That's not where he's at his best. In the NFL, I think if you put him at like a nickel or something like that, where he can keep most things in front of him, I think he can be a really nice NFL prospect. However, as I mentioned, health is an issue with Malik Verdon. I think the reason he's coming out this year as opposed to waiting a year is because of the health issue. He has dealt with a number of injuries the last couple of years, especially in the form of shoulder and arm injuries. This year, he sat out the last 4 games of the regular season, 3 or 4 games of the regular season, and did not play at all in the Big 12 championship game. He did play in the Big 12 championship game, but he had this big, huge arm cast, and you could tell he was out there to support his guys. So you give him an extra mark on the checkbox there for being the consummate teammate that was out there just laying it all on the line for his guys to win a Big 12 championship. But you could tell he was severely limited by the severity of his arm injury. He couldn't really catch anything. He was playing with a club on his hand, just banged up all to hell. And he did not play at all in the Pop-Tart Bowl. I think it's one of those things where he just needed to just sit and rest and heal up. I don't think his injuries are like, where he's going to be severely hampered for his career. And I think if he can get healthy and stay healthy, I think he's going to be a really sneaky NFL prospect here at safety. But health is the entire key here because he's dealt with so many injuries for the last 2 or 3 years, really, where he just hasn't been able to stay on the field for more than 8-10 games a season. So if you can keep him healthy, when he's healthy, he's quick. He's a big body. He's like 6'3", 230, big bodied safety, good instincts, defending stuff in front of him. He takes good angles to the ball carrier. He hits hard, hits like a truck. And, it's a guy that I think if you can work on his technique, especially with his hips, I think he's a good enough athlete where if you can keep working on his technique, especially in his lower body, as far as turning his hips to turn, and chase a receiver down the field. I think if you can work on that technique thing, I think he can turn into just a really nice, well-rounded safety. I don't know if he's going to be a Pro Bowl or if he has the potential to be a Pro Bowl or anything like that, whatever the Pro Bowl is anymore. But, I think it's a guy that is a couple technique adjustments away from being a really, really player, and especially if he can stay healthy. So we'll look at just a little bit of Malik Verdon's tape so you can kind of see what I'm talking about here. But mostly he's projected kind of as an undrafted guy or a day 3 type pick. Not a guy that's necessarily, you're not looking at him in the 3rd, 4th round. This is a guy you're going to take a flyer on in the late rounds because his tape is really good, but you're just a little bit worried about the injuries. So just to show you kind of a couple little sneak peeks of Malik Verdon here. You can see him defending in the run game. He's very good. I would say safeties in general are typically very good in the run game. Comes up, hits like a truck, didn't actually make the thing. Everybody blew the running back about 5-6 yards in the backfield. Making a nice play here, breaking out the pass over the middle of the field. His tape looks great. You just got to keep him healthy. He's a really nice body that can defend stuff. Look good ball instincts right there, picking off that deep pass down the field. Then you get here, making a nice play in the passing game here to wrap up that slot receiver. He's a nice player. You just got to keep him healthy. The next guy we're going to talk about here is going to be Darien Porter. I'm going to get my banner changed here real quick. So Darien Porter is going to be our next one. This guy is maybe the most interesting prospect of the bunch. Not necessarily, Jayden Higgins and Jaylen Noel are going to grade out, but as better prospects. But Darien Porter is the most interesting one. Darien Porter started his career at Iowa State as a receiver after coming out of Bettendorf as a 3-star guy. He held the record in the state of Iowa in high school for the 100-meter and 200-meter dash at 6, and he's a 6 foot 4 inches tall. Problem is he came out of high school at 6'4" at like 180 pounds. He's just a lanky stick, basically. Just not nearly physical enough to be able to handle the Big 12 at receiver. And then a couple years ago, they moved him back to corner, which I thought was very interesting because he is a 6'4" guy with track speed, with like high-end track speed, which as a platform for a body and an athlete, you love at corner. That's a massive 6'4" is a massive frame for a corner. and up to that point, he had been mostly playing special teams, and he had been very, very good at it. So now you turn him in from a very effective special teams player into a corner. And to highlight just how good of a special teams player Darien Porter was, by the end of his career, he was the only player in college football to have blocked a punt 4 years in a row. He blocked a punt 4 years in a row, and then he also blocked a number of field goals this year as well. He's an exceptionally good special teams player, like a guy that is a good enough athlete and a good enough special teams player to justify drafting just as a gunner on special teams. The way, the Patriots had, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but Patriots had a guy for a long time. He's basically a Hall of Fame special teams player. Slater, I think is his last name. And Darien Porter, even just as an athlete that can play on special teams, is draftable. This is a guy at 6'4" that I'm expecting. I would be kind of surprised if his 40 time was above 4.4. I would expect, even at his size, I think he'll run sub 4.4 in the 40. He's got track speed, and he's even a better athlete than he was in high school. His tape is really nice as a zone corner on the perimeter. I think that's where he's going to be at his best. In man, sometimes he, just because of his big frame, sometimes he has a little bit of trouble keeping up, like on slot routes with smaller receivers, just because he is such a big frame. But if he can stay on the perimeter and either sit in zone or just follow a guy on a go route, he is a big time prospect at the NFL level. And because I think he's going to sit nicely as a zone corner, the guy, we'll see what he's got planned for his defense. But I think a team that makes a ton of sense for Darien Porter is the Las Vegas Raiders, playing for Pete Carroll in Las Vegas. Because if you remember that the Seahawks Super Bowl teams where Pete Carroll really made his hay in Seattle was playing with that Legion of Boom defense, and they love to play corners with their zone. And if you look at a guy like Darien Porter, he is a slightly better athlete but a similar body to what Richard Sherman was coming out of Stanford. a zone corner with a really big, long zone corner that's kind of a ball hawk that can sit there and just lock down a side of the field. Darien Porter can be that kind of guy, and he can also play really high end special teams. I think that's a guy that Pete Carroll would love to see. If you look at his projections, he's projected right now in the 3rd round. I could see him going anywhere in the 2nd and 4th. There actually is a first round projection to the Bills here. I'd be kind of surprised if he got there, but it was just last week that prediction was made, so that's interesting. The Vikings and Packers taking him in the 1st round. God, there's a lot of 1st round projections for him. More than I even remembered. You get some stuff in the Vikings, Packers, Chiefs, Ravens there. Lots of round 2s and 3s, even some round 1 projections. So this is a guy that's going to go high. I think you're going to really start to hear his name a lot more after the combine. If he runs 4.36 at the combine at 6'4", you're going to see his name shoot right up the draft board. You're going to start seeing him. You're going to start seeing talk of him in the 1st round because he's still green at corner. He's only been there for a couple years, but his tape is really, really promising. And his frame and his athleticism are high, top end S tier frame and athleticism for that position. Honestly, really his main knock is that he's going to be at the end of his rookie year. I believe he's going to be 25. So it's an interesting, balance there as far as what he looks like as a prospect. Look at that. Good closing speed and just a beautiful play. So it's an interesting, test as far as like his athletic prime versus where his skill prime is going to be, and seeing how quickly NFL teams believe that they can, turn him into a high end corner and really teach him more technique stuff. But gosh, the frame is there. The potential is there to be right here coming off the edge. Bam. That frame, that speed off the edge is lethal in special team situations. He blocks punts. Look at Matt Campbell. He's fired up there. Really high end potential here with Darien Porter. So do not be surprised if after the combine, if he runs really well, if he runs sub 4.4, do not be surprised to see him get some end of the 1st round, first part of 2nd round projections, because I think he's going to fly up draft boards. The last guy here that we're going to talk about a little bit, not going to look at too much tape here because it's an offensive lineman, but Jaylen Travis is, I would say, its last combine participant. He was a grad transfer, which doesn't necessarily mean a lot anymore in the instant transfer days of now. But Jaylen Travis was a transfer from Princeton, came in and played left tackle for Iowa State. His tape is really nice. He's probably projects, I would guess, in the NFL, he probably projects as a big interior lineman because his arms aren't quite elite left tackle type length, but he's got the size, 6'7", 340. He's got good feet. I think he's a technique adjustment from being one of those guys that's an undrafted lineman that just turns out to be just a 10, 12-year NFL guy that just sits on a roster and just does a good job for a long time. So this is a guy, like I said, I think he's probably an undrafted free agent. Could be a late day 3 pick, but keep an eye out for Jaylen Travis. If he's not picked, he'll be one of the first guys picked up for a practice squad spot. So that's for Jaylen Travis. All right, so that's I would say it's 5 guys for the NFL draft coming up that are going to be at the combine here in next month or 2 months from now, next month. And so yeah, it'd be interesting to watch, especially keep an eye out for Darien Porter, Jaylen Noel, Jayden Higgins, those guys for sure. So now, before we get into our next college football playoff discussion, we're going to bring on Mark here to talk about his book. Go, Mark.
Levi, what's going on?
Oh, not too much. Just talking Iowa State football here in the frigid month of February.
I enjoyed the draft prep there.
Thank you.
Very good stuff.
It's a good time when you get some really high end prospects coming out that are, getting 5 guys in the combine for Iowa State was an unheard of thing a long time. If you got 1 guy and you're like, oh, that's pretty neat. Now they've got 5 guys and 3 of them are getting legit 1st round projections. So that's, it's interesting.
And if the recruiting rankings, and correct me if I'm wrong, if they're not significantly better than they were maybe Matt Campbell's first couple of years, then that's really pointing to a lot of excellent development.
Well, it's both, actually. The recruiting rankings are as good as they've ever been. And now you're seeing more fruits of that, where it's taking those mid 3-star guys and turning them into high-end NFL prospects. And obviously now Iowa State has a a resume they can show. They can say, we've got Brock Purdy, we've got Breece Hall, Alan Lazard's put together a nice career. Dave Montgomery's has really had a great career so far, and he's been very good for the Lions. You're seeing Xavier Hutchinson down in Houston is starting to get a lot of snaps. Iowa State is starting to develop a nice pedigree. Will McDonald had a good season with the Jets. Iowa State's getting a nice pedigree in the NFL right now, where they're saying, okay, this is a program we're going to look at for guys that can just play football. And so you're getting there. You get 5 guys. You'll get probably 4 of them drafted at least, maybe a 5th one, and you get some in UDFAs too. So,
and because I keep track of the all-time numbers on everybody in across college football, and I'm not just talking about like wins and losses and bowls, but through the NFL process, the draft picks, the first-round picks, and all of that. I know this doesn't get undersold among people that really follow college football, but overall, just Iowa State, all due respect, the history is pretty sparse when it comes to like the NFL draft.
Yeah,
and for you
pre Matt Campbell, it's
yes.
pretty thin.
For you to rip off that many names of prominent NFL players right now is unheard of.
Well, and it's not even just like good NFL players. I mean, you're talking about Breece Hall's probably a top 3 running back in the NFL. Brock Purdy's got an argument for being a top 10 quarterback. You've got Dave Montgomery might be a top 10 running back. You've got some dudes in the NFL now. It's not just guys that are there and doing stuff. I mean, you've got guys that are legit. I mean, Brock Purdy's salary next year is probably going to have a 3 or a 4 in front of it. So I mean, it's a big deal, and having guys like that weren't necessarily high round picks that are just showing up and being really good. It's great because the NFL understands how good Iowa State is as a program, and now everybody else is starting to see is like, oh wait, that guy went to Iowa State, that guy went to Iowa State. I'm completely missing Charlie Kohler with the Ravens, who had a nice season this year, and will probably continue to ascend up that depth chart. So it's a good time to be an Iowa State football fan right now, and really we knew that the build with Matt Campbell was going to be a little bit of a build coming up, but you're starting to really see the fruits of that labor now, where you've got 5 guys going in the NFL. You're competing for Big 12 championships. You're putting together 11-win seasons, and then you're looking at next year and saying, you lose those guys, but you're not really expecting much of a fall off if at all. So we are in the golden age of Iowa State football, and it's not very often that you get to look at a program and say we are witnessing in front of us the golden age of this program. Certain programs have their year. They come up for a couple years and they just kind of drop back down. It's like, oh, that was a fun little like Rutgers run there with the first Rutgers run with Greg Schiano. Yeah. It's like, oh, that was fun, but like Rutgers wasn't like there as a program. They got really bad after that. There's other teams that have just kind of had their little come up and then they kind of just drop back down to where they were. But you've seen a slow, consistent rise from Iowa State for the last decade, where it's like, wow, this is really interesting to watch, because most of these programs that are good now, they got good 50 years ago, and nobody, most of us were not really alive or at least conscious when that was happening. And now you're seeing a team that's really rising right now and becoming a consistent winner right in front of our eyes, and it's fun to watch.
I may be missing somebody there, but I think you're right on it in terms of the last programs I can think of that rose from the ashes to prominence would have been right in that late 70s, 1980 range, Florida State, Miami.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think Clemson's kind of in that.
Yeah. Although,
I guess I'm not familiar with super familiar with the history of Clemson, but I think they were kind of down for a little bit there.
Yeah, they certainly never had a run like Dabo had for 10 years. But
right.
They had, 8-9 win football teams pretty consistently, 60s, sure. 70s into the 80s, and then that championship in 81.
Oregon was kind of bad there for quite a while, and then it was kind of like in the 90s where they started kind of rising up, and then they got the Phil Knight money, and now they're here. But yeah, it's interesting. We don't get to see this type of thing very often, where you get to see a program come from the ashes and just establish itself right in front of our eyes. And we're doing it in the age of social media and the internet, so it's a lot more visible. This is more visible now than any of those runs would have been. So it's a fascinating time to be Iowa State. But anyway, speaking of the history of college football, if you want to talk to the viewers a little bit about your book.
Yeah. So here's the deal, folks. I'm not going to try to fool you. Iowa State may not even be mentioned in this book unless they were, I'm mentioning a Nebraska game or something. Yeah. So it's about the 1990s. And the reason, Levi, I selected the 90s was I consider this to be the most impactful decade in the history of college football in regards to the transition of how a champion is currently determined versus what it was forever. 1936 was the establishment of the AP poll, and that was the standard up into the 1990s. And then somebody came up with the Bowl Coalition to say, can we at least get number one and number two together? Because, with the bowl tie-ins, I grew up during an age where Nebraska could be number one, but they could be playing Notre Dame number 12 just because the money said, go grab Notre Dame to play Nebraska.
Right.
And so forth and so on. So I always, my first few years of being a college football fan, like 8, 9 years old, like, why is number one playing number 9 and number 2's playing number 7? And why would they not match these teams up?
Right.
So they attempted to do that. But of course, the Big Ten being who they are and the Pac-10 as well said, no, we're not, we don't take part in that.
We need the Rose Bowl.
We go to the Rose Bowl. So it only partially worked. And then, of course, we had the BCS and then on into the playoff era. So what I do here, Levi, is I take every season during the 1990s, 90 through 99, and I just kind of look at, okay, how did we approach this year? Who were supposed to be the national championship contenders? What was the scene like going into each season? And then I set up the preseason rankings. Okay, these were the top 10 teams in America. And then I kind of play through the season. These were the big games, the big controversies, the big plays, the turning points, all of that. And then, okay, we get to the conclusion of the regular season. And what did the postseason determine in regards to who was sent where to play in bowl games? And then how did those games play out? Talk about the controversial plays and game-winning plays and so forth that determined the results there. Okay, then we got our final rankings. And I make a case for, were these rankings valid? Who got screwed? Who got left out that had just as worthy of a resume as the team that was voted number one? And then I also look at, what did this season mean to college football? What did the 1990 season, 91, 92, what did they mean toward the future of college football? Was it the end of a dynasty, the resurgence of a dynasty? What distinguished this particular year? But it's not a history book. I didn't want to write because only dudes like me would read a history book. So I wanted to make it a little bit more marketable than that and more interesting,
a little more approachable.
And considering where we are with college football and us going just into a 12-team playoff and maybe a 14-team very soon, or 16, is I took each one of these seasons, and first I determined who would have played in a conference championship game, because there were no conference championship games in 1990.
Right.
Then the SEC jumped in 92 and the Big 12 in 96, and the Big 10 never at any point during this decade, or the Pac-10, 12 a little bit later. So I at least show, okay, who would have played in a conference championship game? So it's kind of fun to see who would have played in a conference championship game. Yeah. But then I spin it forward into the BCS era. Okay, each one of these seasons, what would have been determined in the BCS format? Who would have played in the BCS championship game? Who would have played in a 4-team playoff? So I show the 4-team playoff for the 1990s. And then I show the 12-team playoff, which really gets interesting because, number one, you had at one point in the 1990s, Levi, 7 conferences when you still had the Big East playing and the Southwest Conference.
Yeah. Yep.
And so the likes of Notre Dame and Miami, when they were independents, they could be undefeated and you put them down to number 8 because you didn't win a conference. And then you've got the likes of Southern Miss and East Carolina making playoffs because they were the top group of 5. So it's very interesting to see the 12-team playoff. And then I also put it into the proposed 14-team playoff each and every season. So it's a fun little 100-page read.
Little what if. Yeah. The one, and you kind of briefly mentioned this too. The 90s are interesting, not just because of the new way we were determining champions, but like you said, the Southwest Conference blew up, and that's when then you had all those teams come into the Big 12 and some of the SEC, stuff like that. So you had big time conference realignment, and that was also the decade where TV really started to flex its muscles. I mean, in the 80s it showed up too, but I think the 90s is really where TV started to impose its presence. Like, this is where TV is going to start really dictating what happens here. And you start seeing, and then it's interesting to follow that even into the early 2000s. I think Nebraska is a really interesting case study here because they were so dominant for so long. And there's an argument to be made that TV, amongst other things, was part of the reasons for Nebraska's downfall, among many reasons. Because part of the reason was Nebraska there was no scholarship limits, and Nebraska had 200 guys on the roster. They could just suck up all the talent from anywhere, in a 12-hour radius. And people went to Nebraska because they were the only football team on TV. And then as soon as national TV kicked on, and then Iowa was on a little bit more, and Iowa State was on a little bit more, and Minnesota was on a little bit more, and whatever else, you had more exposure to these other programs, and then all of a sudden roster limits showed up, and all of a sudden now Nebraska can't just eat all the talent in a 12-hour radius, and we start seeing that fall down. Now there's obviously many other reasons that Nebraska fell off, but there's an argument that the TV part of the TV played a huge part in that too. So and then you kind of saw Nebraska at the end, or not Nebraska, Notre Dame kind of at the end of their long run. It's the 90s is a fascinating decade from college football for a lot of different reasons. Have you listened to? There's a podcast series that came out last fall called "Who Killed College Football." Couple guys from Vox Media, Stephen Godfrey and Ryan Nanny.
Okay.
Have this. It's like a 6-part series. It's Who Killed College Football, and they, one episode looks at the NCAA, and the next one looks at TV execs, the next one looks at conferences, next one's coaches, and it's all these different factors as to how we got from what it used to be, how we got from basically being glorified PE class to where we're now. So it's a fascinating series. And I think you and the people that other hears would always also enjoy it. Not a sponsor of the show, just a good podcast you can listen to if you're into college football.
Sounds like it. Yeah.
So you also mentioned it a little bit. If you want to have a short discussion here, a little bit. We saw a bunch of stories come out, yesterday and a little bit last week, and that kind of they echoed a sentiment that I think a lot of college football fans had been kind of that we'd gotten hints of and had been kind of leaning in the direction of, is that basically after next season, the Big Ten and the SEC assume control of the college football playoff, which that's a whole other thing. But it's happening. That's the world we're going to live in. It's happening. Those two conferences are going to control the playoff. And the thought is, the reports are that both conferences are very interested in pushing towards a 14 or 16 team conference. I would think if they're going to expand, they're just going to go to 16 teams and get more games, more TV money and things like that. I would assume that's I know they're entertaining a 14 team, but it seems like if you're going to expand, just go to the full 16 team bracket and call it a day. I don't know. The thought too is that the conferences would get a number of auto bids. I think the one article I read said up to 4 per 4 auto bids each for the Big Ten and the SEC, which feels like a lot. But this is the Big Ten and the SEC flexing their muscles essentially, and just saying this, we're going to do this our way or the highway type of thing. I guess what are your initial thoughts on the expansion there? And we can kind of talk about it, because obviously then I was saying the Big 12 and the ACC and all that have this is a lot of moving parts for them too.
So the expansion, fine, 12, 14, 16. Once we got to this point, who were we going to see in the playoffs this year? Alabama, South Carolina, whoever else. Fine. Yeah. We've gotten to 12. It's more about, for me, the issues are, number one, depending on where that number lands, what do we do with conference championships, and do they matter in this? If we get to 16 and then nobody's got buys, do the conference championship games matter? Is that almost a penalty? If you're just going to give a first round bye to the conference or the first round playoff game, home playoff game, it doesn't really matter. No. So that's an issue I have with it. But getting back to your original point about the power move being made by the SEC and the Big Ten, I hate it. I cannot communicate how fervently I hate it, because I don't think either one of us would be that flabbergasted if 4 SEC/Big Ten teams earned their way into a 14, and I mean legitimately earned their way into a 14 or 16 team playoff. I have no issue with that. No. But they want the best of both worlds. And I saw this coming, and I'm not saying I was the only one. Tony Petitti, when this started to get shaken up a little bit, and even before the SEC and the Big Ten made this alliance, when he first took over the league from Kevin Warren, he made a comment and he said, we're going to make sure that Big Ten football is as entertaining as can be, meaning we're going to play the best brands. They're going to play each other more often in late October and November. But we're also going to ensure that we get the most playoff teams that the Big Ten can possibly get in. And my initial reaction was obviously, well, that's counterproductive. No, you can't do both.
Right.
Well, then it only took me a few seconds to think, well, that's a loaded statement. So they're going to do something to ensure just that. So they want both. They want to put the best brands on the field in the Big Ten and the SEC and weight down their records and say, we're fine with that. We have 8 and 4 teams, fine, because they're still going to make the playoffs because we got auto bids. Well, I want, if we're going to have a committee, Levi, and we're going to trust that committee, and I'm not fully sold on the committee, but I think they've done a decent job. I don't have any huge qualms with the 14 playoff and in the teams they selected. I never thought that they made some kind of grave error.
Yeah, no, I don't. I think they got it like 85% right most years. Where the first 3 are very easy, and the fourth one is there's really not a good argument for them to not be in, but you could make an argument for something else type of thing.
Exactly. But if we're going to entrust this committee, select the 16 teams that earned it. And if the Big Ten and the SEC are as good as they think they are, they will definitely not get shut out. If they're
not going to get shut out. That's the fascinating part about these 4 auto bids for them is like, are they under this belief that anyone's not giving the Big Ten and the SEC the benefit of the doubt?
Exactly. And
who are we pretending that they're not getting that?
And I would be more in favor of it, although I would not even agree with this. Would it be 4 auto bids and no more? You're going to get 4.
And that's just it. You just get 4 every year, period. Yeah.
No, of course, that's not going to be
That's not how it works.
They might get 5.
Yeah. I'm sure the SEC would get their auto 4 and then say, well, what about 5 and 6? The 6th best team beat the 2nd best team. They should be in, and they're 9 and 3, whatever. And honestly, the SEC perturbs me even more on this than the Big Ten, because the Big Ten plays 9 conference games. You know who doesn't play 9 conference games? The SEC. So because the entire reason the SEC is like, we don't want to play 9 games. Our conference is too good. They shouldn't have to play such a difficult schedule. Buddy, I don't know how to tell you this. Everybody else plays 9 conference games, including the Big Ten. The Big Ten also plays 9 conference games, not non-conference games, 9 conference games. Well, the 9th game for the SEC is just a Sun Belt school or whatever. So the SEC, it really annoys me because they'll only go to 9. They'll only go to 9 conference games if they can get 4 teams guaranteed into the playoff. But like, you going to a 9th conference game, like Georgia eating 1 more loss and going to 10-2 or 9-3 on a regular basis is not going to keep them out of the playoff. Yeah. A 9-3 Georgia team is probably going to be in even at a back end seed most years. You're going to, even if you played 9 conference games, you're still going to have your 4 best teams are going to be in, and you're going to you might have another 1 or 2. Like that's what perturbs me about this, is that the SEC is just straight up not playing on a level playing field with everybody else in terms of the schedule they have to go through. Because it's not like they're replacing that 9th. They're not replacing that 9th game with a team that would be in the middle of the SEC. They're playing.
A few teams are. A few teams on occasion.
Alabama will go to play somebody in Jerry World, but like,
well, I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about a second game, like a South Carolina, like a. Trying to think who they played. South Carolina always plays Clemson, but if they pick up somebody else, like Georgia plays Georgia Tech.
Sure.
Always, and then they play Clemson last year. So they played 2.
Sure. So like
that's not the rule. That's the exception.
That's the exception to the rule. Yes. That's the exception that proves the rule, is that most of the SEC they're not replacing that 9th conference game with a middle of the road SEC team. They're replacing it with Georgia State or Jacksonville State. Like they're playing some team that just, they might even be a decent for the division they're in, but they're just not going to, they're just going to get run over.
And real quickly, not to talk down to anybody out there, but just if somebody's not adding this up, because I always hear the injury factor being interjected into this is why the SEC is benefiting from all this, because they're basically playing a scrimmage game the second to last week of the season. But no, it's also about, it's just sheer math that if you're playing, I just did a breakdown of all the non-conference games played by all the conferences to determine, okay, who played the best. Well, the SEC, that extra non-conference game is against FCS and low group of 5 teams. So those 16 SEC teams are winning at minimum 15 of those games. They're probably sweeping 16 games.
Right.
So instead of playing each other and splitting 8 and 8, you're adding 8 artificial wins into the conference. And pre-playoff, that intent was we want to get a couple more bowl teams in there, a couple more 6 and 6 teams in to make more money. Now it's toward the playoff.
Right.
And it's not fair.
No, it's not at all. And the other issue too is they play that FCS team in November. They're not playing it at the beginning of the season.
Yeah.
They're playing it in November, so it's a week off for their guy. It's functionally a bye week for most of their starters. It's just an extra bye week built in. But oh, by the way, we get a win during that bye week. It's a very raw deal for everybody else. But the Big Ten doesn't appear to care about it at all. And the other conferences that are saying, hey, this is garbage, don't have the muscles to push the SEC and say, hey, you need to play this 9th game, or hey, Notre Dame, you need to join a conference. No one, which that's a whole other deal. That's a whole other deal. Because now you're talking about if the Big Ten has 4 bids and the SEC has 4 bids, Notre Dame functionally has if you go 11-1 or 11-1 or better, you're in, maybe even 10-2. If you're 10-2 or better, you're in a 16-team playoff. So Notre Dame functionally has in their own auto bid built in, as long as they have a respectable record. You've got 9 spots already bottled up in this playoff, plus maybe having another Big Ten or another 1 or 2 Big Ten and SEC teams in there as just at larges. And now you're talking about, at that point, I think if you go to that, now you need to talk about having the Big 12 and the ACC both having an auto bid, and then leaving the extra spots for, at larges G5s. To me, the 16-team playoff becomes a lot more palatable for the small conferences, for Big 12, and I shouldn't say small conferences, but for the Big 12 and the ACC that are not controlling the playoff. You feel fine about that expansion, I think, as long as you get an auto bid for that conference. Not, it's not, the best however many champions, and then the ACC and the Big 12 kind of have a shoe in there, but, could theoretically get left out in case there's a weird American team or something like that. You need, if you come out of that saying the Big 12 and the ACC have a guaranteed spot for each conference in that playoff, and then whatever else happens after that, I think you can be okay with it. You don't like it because it's very clear that the ACC or that the SEC and the Big 10 have essentially created a duopoly in college football, and which frankly there needs to be, at that point there probably should be antitrust investigations done as far as collusion and things like that. But that's a whole other legal constitutional thing. But I'm a little worried for the future of college football, because I think that the people in charge and making decisions have basically zero interest or have zero knowledge on what makes college football fundamentally appealing to the average person. I don't think they have any understanding of how that is. They see it as a business, which I guess, sure, that's their job to see it as a business. So from that perspective, I guess I can't blame them, because they're concerned about they're concerned about the bottom of the number at the bottom of the cash flow chart at the end of the year. But so I get it, but it also, I don't think they understand how that number exactly ends up that way. I mean, and that's pervasive across many industries, where the people making decisions just don't understand what makes their product, attractive to the consumer. But I specifically think college football execs and conference commissioners and stuff like that, I wouldn't go so far to say that they actively don't like the current college football model, or they actively hate college football. I don't think that's true, but I think they fundamentally misunderstand what makes college football what it is. College football is, the money says college football is about the big brands getting on TV and selling lots of selling $1 million 30-second ads to Pepsi. That's what they think college football is that's what the money says college football is. But if you talk to the average normie fan, college football is about Thursday night watching Ohio and Toledo going to quadruple overtime, in November, and the winner goes to the MAC title game, and then watching, staying up late on a Saturday to watch BYU and Utah beat the shit out of each other in the Holy War, stuff like
Absolutely.
that. That's
And
that's what the normie feels college football is.
and beyond that, Levi, just to extend on your point, I get it too. They're looking at a ledger, and I'm doing a series right now, as I do every off season. I'll go through every conference and go through the TV ratings. And basically, if you look at the top 10 games, there's about 30 games that get rated by the networks every week. And if you look at the top 10, it's flooded with the Big Ten and the SEC. That's aside from the phenomenon, let me spit that out, that is Deion Sanders. It's an
aberration.
Crazy.
Is what it
that's
is.
Crazy,
Yeah.
But it's an aberration. But it's basically about the 8th highest rated game each week shows up as a Big 12 game, somewhere in that range. So I get the business side of it, but to your point, the guy that roots for Kansas State, who is a big college football fan, but first and foremost, it's about Kansas State and the Big 12. He feels some kind of connection to if he's got time in his day to check out the Ohio State Wisconsin game or the Georgia Florida game, because he feels as though we're all in this together and there is connection.
Right.
And everything that's been decided by these major conferences in the past when it comes to any kind of money, contractual agreements from bowls has been split in the past. It's always just been, we split everything. Mm-hmm. And now suddenly the Big Ten, no, we get 29% and you guys get 13%. And that's the first time, when I heard Brett Yormark, and I know he's got to be a salesman and put on a grin and say everything's great with the world. But for him to say in the last 6 months that, at no other time has things been so equitable and so fair, and we're in this all together, and it's like, no,
we're not. I mean,
that's not the case.
I mean, yeah, he's got to say what he's got to say, but like nobody is under the impression that we're all in this together. The Big Ten and the SEC are in it for those two, and that's about it. And they're just kind of whatever. But It's interesting though, because it seems like the conferences do understand that while they can threaten to break away and do their own thing, I think it seems to me like they realize that they really can't, because otherwise they would have done it. They would have just done it. You would just say after the 25 season, the SEC and the Big Ten are going to go be the NFL developmental league, and that's just what we're going to be, or whatever. They could have already done that. Nobody is stopping them from doing that, except for the fact that they know that they can't do that. That's just not how it works. That's not when you take this chunk of college football off and this chunk of college football off, the college football normies are still going to watch the Big 12 ACC G5 version of college football, because that's college football. That's the part of college football that I think a lot of people say this is really what the sport kind of is supposed to be, or whatever. It's parody, it's fun games with guys that you've never even heard of that are just out there just playing football because they love playing football or whatever. And I think a lot of people see the SEC and the Big Ten as like this pseudo, it's a TV product. There's a lot of times where it just doesn't feel like college football because it feels like such a corporatized version of the game. So, I think personally, I think people still watch it, obviously, but lots of people are still going to watch it, but I think it loses a lot of its allure as a college football product if you were to do that. And I think the SEC and the Big Ten understand that.
I think they do too. There is no way that they're going to, even though I hear these crazy comments every so often from somebody in my chat that says, I just want to watch the SEC and the Big Ten. Yeah, those people in the minority. The powers that be understand that they are not galvanizing their fan bases anymore by separating, but they are cutting off the Midwest, the middle part of the country, to basically say, we're not watching the SEC and the Big Ten play anymore, and they don't want to do that.
No, they don't want to, but I think there are enough people that if that happened and it felt like the Big Ten and the SEC were intentionally just cutting off the legs of the Big 12, the ACC, I think there's a lot of people that would feel a tremendous amount of resentment towards that and say, "That I'm not watching any of that."
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I don't believe that. I believe, like you, that the Big Ten and the SEC at least have enough brains to understand that they can't cut off.
You just can't do it.
Whatever, 40% of America.
Yeah, and that's why at some point this is kind of a big game of chicken. At some point, I think someone's gonna have their bluff called. And I think right now the rest of college football has more leverage than the Big Ten and the SEC would like to admit that they do, because the SEC and the Big Ten have they have the eyeballs, they have the attention of the SEC and whatever else. Actually, one point I wanted to bring up earlier when you're talking about the TV ratings too is one big factor in that also is that the Big Ten and the SEC get put on, CBS, ABC, and stuff like that. They get put on the main line. When Iowa State and Kansas State get put on CBS or on the big channel, ESPN or whatever, they hold their own. I mean, they're not getting 10 million, but they're getting 5 million or whatever. When you put,
it's a great point.
When you put teams on premier networks, they're gonna get more eyeballs. That's just how it's a self-fulfilling prophecy in that you
Absolutely.
say we put the big teams on the big networks, so the big teams get the big eyeballs. Well, yeah, because you put them on the big networks that are on cable that anybody with a basic cable package can get. It's if you have the most basic YouTube TV package, you can watch any SEC game you want.
Yes.
But when you're on Pac-12, when you're on the Big 12 After Dark, we used to be Pac-12 After Dark, now Big 12 After Dark or whatever, and it's and it's BYU and Arizona State on ESPN Plus, which this year was an amazing game. BYU and Arizona State is a top, this year was a top 15 game. It was an amazing football game, that any college football fan should want to watch. Now, granted, the time zone's a little bit of a barrier there just because it's just later and it just is what it is. But when you put that on ESPNU or on ESPN Plus or whatever, fewer people are gonna watch it. That's how it works. When you put South Carolina and Mississippi State on CBS on the main CBS channel, but then you take a top 10 matchup between Arizona State and Iowa State and put that on FS1 or on ESPN Plus or something like that. Yeah, they're gonna have less eyeballs.
Yeah,
that's just how it's. The number of self-fulfilling prophecies required to keep this apparatus going is just drives me nuts.
but to be fair, those games are still going to get more. But you are
for sure.
You're completely right. There are people out there that just know, they're not in it Monday through Friday like we are and looking at rosters and everything. I'm watching college football on Saturday night and I flip on ABC because that's what I do. Yeah. I just watch the ABC game. And so if I'm getting fed Georgia and Florida or Alabama and Ole Miss, that's what I'm watching. Right. And if somebody decided to feed me Arizona State and Iowa State, I'd watch that too. Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. The time frame, the time window, and the network has a lot to do with the TV ratings.
It's huge impact. I mean, no one's going to pretend that if all other circumstances are equal, that Iowa State's going to outdraw Texas on TV. No one's pretending that's going to happen. But yeah, it's easy to say,
I was closer.
It would be much closer. If you put Texas on ESPN Plus and you put Iowa State on ABC or on CBS, they're going to get good.
I would love to, if we could only run an alternate universe to see, let's put the Ohio State Michigan.
We'll never going to find that
out and see how many people watch it. Which people would still find it, but not as many people.
You wouldn't be channel surfing and be like, oh, there's that game. Like you'd have to go seek it out. Now, lots of people would still do that, but the gap would close.
Absolutely.
Oh, the gap would close a lot more than I think TV execs would like to have or have you admit.
Yeah.
All right, so it is what it is. Like I said, I think the 16-team playoff has a number of problems beyond just the they have too many teams and it's where the playoff is boring because it's all SEC and Big Ten and then you just got a couple random teams in there, so it's not quite as interesting as it could be. It's the two conferences inexplicably have control of the entire thing of college football that has massive problems as far as like I said, kind of almost a duopoly on the game. And there's so many issues that goes there, but specific for Iowa State, how it affects Iowa State. I think the path is still the same, is that win the conference, you're in. If you have a really good season, if you're 11-1 or 12-0 and you are a runner-up, you still got a decent shot at getting in. And that's just what it is. I don't think the path really changes for a team like Iowa State very much, but it'll still be frustrating when, you beat Iowa and Kinnick and, Iowa State goes 11-1 and, is a runner-up for a Big 12 title, but then Iowa goes 8-4 and somehow sneaks into the playoff. That'll be frustrating, but it is what it is. What's up, Corey?
Yeah. And one last note out of me, unless you've got anything else.
No, I was getting ready to wrap up the show. So,
but yeah, the conference championship weekend, I am interested to see what can be dealt because they're making too much money to just get rid of it. The SEC games still get like 13 to 14 million views, and the Big Ten's right behind them. I don't know that that's going to go away. I've seen some very interesting ideas about, like, if there's a conference champion, or during the regular season, one team has the lead in the conference, that they're the conference champion. You don't need to play a conference championship game. That team's 8-0 or whatever, 9-0. They won the conference. And then you create like bubble games within the conference, and those teams play that weekend.
Yes, I think I think I might have proposed this on your show one time or whatever. But here's the way you fix all this. You can have conference championship games without having conference championship games. Is week 12, or the last game of the season, is open for the entire conference. Once you get to the end, 1 and 2 play each other in the last week of the regular. This is the regular season. The last 2 teams play. Or you could even back it up and say the last 2 weeks of a team schedule are open, and then you have a built-in semifinal there. So 1 and 4 will then play each other. 2 and 3 play each other. Winner of that plays each other. 3 and then the 2 losers play for a third place game, or whatever you want to call it. Or then the middle teams play each other. The bottom teams play each other. So what you're doing is you're building in a conference playoff into the regular season. You're automatically getting good matchups, because you're getting top of the conference, middle of the conference, bottom of the conference. You're getting equal matchups. You're probably not getting any blowouts. You're getting good games between high profile teams at the top. You're getting a semifinal and a conference final where you can say, this is our conference championship, because this is our conference champion, because they won our playoff at the end of the regular season. You have the same number of games. You have automatically interesting and fun games the last 2 weeks of the season. It's perfect.
It's not quite perfect. I love it. And I far prefer it over 18 team conferences where they only play 9 and miss 8 teams in their conference and all that business.
Right.
But unfortunately, because you've eliminated 2 conference games, so we're determining who's going to play in these games after only 7 conference games. So you're thinning out the
I think when you get to there, though, by the time you get to the last 2 weeks of the regular season, you have a pretty good idea who at least your top 4 is going to be. Now, last week, very specifically, last year in Big 12 is like the top 6 had a good shot in the last 2 weeks. But for the most part, most seasons, your top 4 are going to be fairly well defined by the last 2 weeks. So I think that's why.
Oh, I still like it. Yeah,
I think that outcome, even if it is not 100% perfect and there are slight imperfections there, I think that is by far the best way you could do this, as far as building in a definitive conference champion without having to have a conference championship game.
And I think for the rest of these conferences, like from 4-5 down, where they're really not factored in, and it's just they're going to play whatever the seeding is, I think that even engages the fan base a little bit in terms of we don't know who we're going to play the last 2 games of the season.
It keeps it interesting. So like last year, if you looked at the Big 12, you would have had a 4-team playoff in the last 2 weeks between Colorado, BYU, Arizona State, and Iowa State. You'd have a 4-team playoff there, which would have been super interesting. Everybody had been on board for that. And then like after that, you'd have had some, actually, I'm just going to, just real quick, I'm going to pull up the Big 12 just standings from last year.
And one quick idea, Levi, and I think this is pretty basic, would be if 2 of those teams had already played, you can always just flip 2 seeds, and it's not a big deal.
If it's a tiebreaker, you can just flip it around. It's not a big deal. So like last year, going into you'd have had a Kansas State, West Virginia matchup, which would have been really interesting. You'd have had a Texas Tech, Kansas matchup, which would have been really interesting, because Kansas was red hot the last part of the season, and Texas Tech was a solid team. You could have had a TCU Cincinnati type thing. You could have had some really interesting, if you just went top 4 and then everybody just played, these 2 seeds played, then these 2 played, and these 2 played, you'd be talking about having Baylor TCU, which is a rivalry game. You'd play that, you'd end up playing it again, but who cares? You'd have a Texas Tech Kansas State game, great game. West Virginia Kansas, super fun. Cincinnati, Houston, interesting. Utah, Arizona, old Pac-12 matchup, whatever. Yeah. Both teams are bad, but who cares? And then UCF and Oklahoma State, whatever. You'd had interesting equal matchups. Even at the bottom of the conference, you'd had some interesting matchups to look at those last 2 weeks. Even if they were just games, you could say, oh, this would be interesting who we're playing the last couple weeks of the season. And then, like I said, a 4-team playoff between Iowa State, Arizona State, BYU, and Colorado the last 2 weeks. Magnificent. It'd have been perfect. That would have been like, to an already crazy Big 12 season, that would have been a fabulous way to end it.
as opposed to, even though there was a lot of drama surrounding those teams being tied, Iowa State and Kansas State played the game that was really a fun, interesting, entertaining game. But the other ones played. Colorado blew out Oklahoma State by 1,000,000 points, and Arizona State, of course, played Arizona.
BYU fairly
Houston,
easily took care of Arizona or Houston. Yeah, Houston. That's what it was. BYU and Houston. Yeah. So like the drama was all the way, because the drama went through the end of the Iowa State game. And once Iowa State beat Kansas State, then the drama was kind of out of it, because it's like, well, then BYU just has to win the game. They should win anyways, type of thing. Yeah. So Iowa State took the drama out of it at midnight, but the drama in the conference went to midnight at the end of the day on Saturday of the last week of the season. And that's as good a PR as you can get to say, hey, our conference is fun and interesting. Yeah. And I think doing that 14 play, if they're going to make you get rid of the conference championship game, or at least incentivize you to get rid of it, that little 14 playoff the last 2 weeks of the regular season, I think is fabulous. I think that's such a good idea.
Are those truly going to be playoff games, or just additional regular season games?
They would be games 11 and 12.
Because they could actually, this could be another quirk though. They could create a tie. There could not be a tie going into the final 2 weekends.
Well, so what you would do, you wouldn't, once you get into the 14 playoff. Yeah. It's just a 14 like playoff. Like, so it's basically a single elimination playoff from there. So like you wouldn't create any new ties, because you'd have to win to be eligible for the conference title game, basically. Okay. So the game between the winners of week 11 play in week 12 for what is the Big 12 title game. And you can even put it in Jerry World. You don't have to play on conference. Say the 12th game between the winners of the week 11 games play in Jerry World for the Big 12 title game. Yeah. Great. You get to have a big time neutral site conference game in week 12. Awesome.
I'm going to map this out in every conference.
Absolutely. It's a fun scenario. It'd be fun in the SEC. It'd be fun in the Big 10. Sure. The Big 10, like a week 11 and week 12 playoff with Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State, and who'd been fourth? Indiana. Yeah. That'd been fun. Yeah. And then the week 12 winners play in Indianapolis. Great. Awesome. Good time.
Love it. Yeah. I enjoy that. Yeah.
So, well, I'm gonna get ready. We're gonna wrap her up for this week. So, Mark, thank you for jumping on, talking about your book, and having a fun little. Levi. Absolutely. Thank you. You too. Thanks, Mark.
Disputed national champions, everyone. There you go. Links in the description section.
Thank you.
Thanks, Levi.
So, everybody, thank you for watching this week's episode of Iowa State Cyclones Live here on the Voice of College Football Network. Thanks for Mark again for coming on. Hope you guys enjoyed the draft previews. Hope you guys enjoyed the college football playoff discussion. We will see you guys again next Tuesday to talk more Iowa State football. So, everybody, thank you for watching, and we will see you again next week. Go State.